Welcome to another exciting episode of Beauty and Wellbeing, Longevity and Vitality. I'm your host, Dr. Sophie, and today we have a very special guest joining us, Dr. Nichola Conlon. Dr. Nichola is a molecular biologist specializing in the study of aging as a biologically complex disorder. After years focused on early-stage drug discovery with a leading biotech firm, Dr. Nichola founded Nuchido Laboratories to deliver disruptive innovation in the field of anti-aging, rejuvenation, and health span, driven by her belief that cutting-edge science should not lie hidden. Dr. Nichola is on a mission to democratize science and has a skill for translating and presenting advanced science in a way that helps to educate and support people to take control of their health. Along with leading scientists at Nuchido, Dr. Nichola has identified the right combination of targets to restore cellular NAD plus production back to youthful levels, leading to the development of a second generation NAD plus booster called Nuchido TIME Plus. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation, and I'm so excited for today's podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here to have a chat with you.
Thank you. Nichola, let's dive.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here to have a chat with you.
Thank you. Nichola, let's dive right in. Can you please tell us a bit about your background and what led you to focus on the science of aging?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is actually in drug development. I worked in big pharma. First of all, working on cancer therapy, but then I actually got moved onto projects that were looking at drugs to slow aging, which sounds pretty crazy, but actually our age is our biggest risk factor for pretty much every major disease that drugs companies are trying to target. So the idea is if you can slow your rate of cellular aging even just a little bit, then maybe you can reduce the risk or the onset of many age-related diseases in one go. So this was about 10 years ago that I first got involved in this longevity space. And from that point on, I was absolutely fascinated. The science is incredible. It's truly going to change the way that we age. But for me, working in the world of drug development, it was very frustrating because a lot of the molecules that worked very well were not actually drugs. They were natural molecules, and therefore drugs companies weren't interested in them. So basically, I really wanted to take some of these more natural molecules and look at, could we develop them into consumer products, things like supplements or topicals, but actually give them the research they deserve. So give them proper clinical testing and trials, and get this science really out to consumers, because it's so frustrating as a scientist to see all this amazing science happening, but then nobody actually benefiting from it. So in 2017, I left the world of drug development and I started Nuchido with that mission of taking the science, but turning it into not drugs, but consumer products.
Fantastic, fantastic. You mentioned that aging is a biologically complex disorder. Can you please elaborate on this and what this means and how it impacts our approach to anti-aging and also rejuvenation, please?
Yeah, well, in terms of, anything in a biological sense, our biology is inherently really complicated.
Right.
There's so much going on beneath the surface constantly that is really impacting our cellular, everything from our cellular health all the way through to everything we experience on the outside. And aging is something that happens in every single cell across the entire body. So when I say it's biologically complex, it's because there's a lot of things interplaying or interlinking that are driving the aging process. And actually, a lot of scientific research now shows that there are essentially 12 key things that are going on in the cells that are driving the entire aging process. And these are known as the hallmarks of aging. And on the outset, it may seem that, there's only 12 things going on. That's simple. But actually, they're all talking to one another. They're all influencing one another. And they're all, one getting worse makes another one get worse, which feeds back and causes something else to happen. So that's the biological complexity. But I guess when it comes to how we deal with that, what's all of the evidence shows is that actually, although it's really complex, if you can target some of those cellular root causes of aging, aging actually is something that you can impact. It's something that you can slow, it's something that you can reverse. And up until fairly recently, it that we didn't even know if that was possible. We always thought that aging was this one-way street, that once it started, there was no return. But we're now proving that that is actually not true. And aging is something that you can speed up or slow down.
This is mind blowing. So, scientifically, it's been proven that we can slow down aging and reverse aging. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We believed for a long time that as time ticked on and the aging process was going forward, there was no going back. And even a lot of scientists within our field really believed that. But now all of the evidence is so strong that we know that you can actually affect the aging process. You can speed it up or slow it down. And this is happening at a cellular level. And when you speed it up or slow it down at the cellular level, that's when it speeds it up or slows it down across the whole body.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. So, literally, we are empowered and we can do things to slow down our own aging on a cellular level, but also on a much bigger level.
Exactly that. Yeah, we are anything to do with aging, although we think about it in terms of specific diseases, or we think about it in terms of, the way it appears on the outside, actually everything goes back to the cells. Anything to do with aging all starts at the cellular level. So it's really important to start looking at addressing cellular health if you really want to have a big impact on anything age related.
You mentioned there are 12 hallmarks of aging. What are they, please?
So, I mean, I can go through all of them, but that would be, that would be a science lesson for a whole day. So maybe I'll pull out a couple that are really influential and ones that people might be very familiar with. So, one of the first ones that I would be mentioning is something called DNA damage. So we know in every single cell in our body, we have our DNA. This is the blueprint for the cell. It tells the cell what to do, how to behave. And there's a lot of effort that goes into repairing our DNA and keeping it in good health when we're young. But unfortunately, as we get older, this DNA repair process gets turned down and we start to suffer from DNA damage in our cells. And if the DNA is damaged, that means the cell may start to malfunction. It doesn't work properly anymore. And unfortunately, this is what happens as we get older. We suffer from more DNA damage. So this is one of the most famous hallmarks of aging. When it comes to, aging of the skin, for example, we know that any DNA damage in our melanocytes, which are the pigment producing cells in our body, when they become DNA damaged, they start overproducing pigment. And that's why we see the classic signs of hyperpigmentation. So that's kind of like showing how something that is happening at a cellular level is actually driving what we see on the outside as the aging process. The second hallmark that's really exciting, especially in terms of skin aging, is something called senescence. And in a way, this is also linked to DNA damage. Remember how I said everything's all interlinked? Well, sometimes when our cells suffer from too much damage, what happens is a little alarm bell goes off and the cell says, oh, there's so much damage in the cell, like to the point where we just can't repair it anymore. We really need to just shut this cell down before it potentially becomes dangerous. So the cell, rather than getting recycled and eliminated from the body, it essentially just goes to sleep. And this is called a senescent cell. It's like a sleeping cell. But unfortunately, it would be great if these cells just went to sleep and were quiet. But it's now known that actually they aren't quiet. They're asleep, but they're secreting lots of inflammation. And this is incredibly damaging for our bodies, because another hallmark of aging is chronic inflammation. So essentially, again, just relaying that back to skin, if you have your skin and it's older, you will have an accumulation of these rogue senescent cells. Some people refer to them as zombie cells because they're asleep, but they're like causing chaos. And you get these zombie cells, they're sitting in the skin. First of all, they're secreting a lot of inflammation, which causes all redness, rosacea. It causes damage. It degrades the collagen, the elastin. But also, they're sitting there and they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, i.e., they're not making collagen. They're not making your own elastin. So you start to see a decline in collagen, elastin. You start to see the fine lines, the wrinkles. And again, the sort of backstory of why that's happening in the cells is because of these senescent cells. So you can very quickly see how these hallmarks are actually causing what we see on the outside.
So we've been doing everything wrong. We've been treating signs and symptoms.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but yeah, but a lot of people say, well, if this is all true, well, why haven't we been doing anything about this? And the answer is because we didn't understand it.
Right.
We've been doing the best we can, but we didn't know all
And
of this.
technologies we have.
Yeah, but now the science is moving forward. Now we know all this. I think that's why I said at the start, this information is really going to change the way that we address aging, because it really does mean there are different options and things that we can actually do.
I'd like to go back to your talk about skin. This is very important because, my clinic in London, we treat patients with their aesthetic concerns. And one of the most common concerns they come and see us for is skin pigmentation, or patients with rosacea, with acne, with skin disorders. And for me, it's all about their well being as well as their skin condition and aesthetic concern. And this is very important because now we're understanding through all of this science, it's all about that cellular and cell damage rather than the signs and symptoms that we're seeing. So we need to go back to the foundation and understand what's happening and treat that, or enhance the molecular function, cellular function, and then come and treat the surface. Is that correct?
Absolutely. If your cells are not functioning correctly, then you can do whatever you want to the outside, but you're never really going to get a real impactful benefit, because you are essentially, ignoring the root cause of the problem. So cellular health is incredibly important. We have 37 trillion cells in our body, and every single one of those cells get impacted by these hallmarks of aging. So you can very quickly see that if your cellular health isn't good, it's going to impact everything. And, this is even becoming more apparent when you look at some of the studies that have come out recently showing the link between, say, our gut health and our skin. And the fact that if we can improve the health of our skin, it works the other way as well. It actually lowers inflammation throughout the whole body and can actually improve the health of the entire person by improving the skin quality. So again, everything is interlinked. The cells, the health of the cells is so important. And I think now that we know how we can help to improve the cells, it's really important that practitioners such as yourself, do what you're doing and start to speak to patients about the fact that, I can do whatever to the surface, but really we want to get your cells in good working order to begin with and continue to maintain that as well.
Sure. How can that be implemented in clinical practice? So, how can we help our patients and ourselves, in fact, to improve our cellular function and reduce cellular aging? Well, rate of cellular aging.
Yeah, I mean, there's a many different things that are, incredibly influential for cellular health. In terms of when it comes to aging, a lot of people think that the way that you will age is your genetics, and it's kind of a given, and there's nothing you can do about it. But what we know is actually lifestyle is very influential in terms of our cellular health and influencing what we refer to as our biological age, which is the age that we are on the inside at the cellular level, which is very different to your chronological age, which is just the number of years since you were born. Quite often a person's biological age and chronological age don't add up, and that's a very good indicator of how healthy they are at the cellular level. But the good thing about biological age is it can, as well as go up, it can also reverse. As we just said, you can reverse aging. And lifestyle seems to play a huge role in terms of cellular health. So it almost sounds a little bit boring. All the things that we've heard that are bad for us or good for us. We should be doing our exercise. We should be doing, not eating a beige diet, eating all the fruits and veg, all of that sort of stuff. it really still rings true. And again, just emphasizing to people the importance of this. It's so underestimated. So I think that's one half. The other half is more, looking at some more advanced technologies and things that we see coming out. And one of the exciting areas, and something that I particularly have studied a lot, is the area of NAD and its role in cellular health.
So NAD is a term that's been gaining a lot of attention at the moment, and you're one of the pioneering scientists when it comes to the role of NAD for anti-aging and rejuvenation. So can you please explain to our audience what it is, first of all, and why it's so important?
Yeah, it's certainly become a buzzword. Back when I started looking into it 10 years ago, like literally nobody had any idea what it was. So for me, it's exciting that a lot more people are talking about it. But basically, it's a natural molecule. It's found in every cell in our body. It's involved in hundreds of different reactions. But the two things it's most important for are our energy production. So in our cells, we have our mitochondria, which are energy power plants, and they literally take the food that we eat and convert it into all of the energy that our cells need to function. And essentially, NAD is a very important part of this pathway. So very, very important in energy production and metabolism. The second thing that it's really important for is actually to generate repair in our bodies. So as I mentioned, we get a lot of damage, and a lot of this damage needs to be repaired. And we have all of these repair processes that are constantly going on in our cells to deal with this damage. And NAD acts like a fuel to drive many of these repair processes. So basically, like as a general rule of thumb, if you have a lot of NAD, you have high NAD in your cells, you will have lots of energy production, lots of repair. But if your NAD declines, then energy production gets turned down and also repair gets turned down. So the reason that NAD has become so interesting in the aging field is because just like many other things in aging, NAD also declines with age. So as NAD goes down, energy production goes down. We start to feel that as things like tiredness, fatigue, brain fog, just general lack of energy. And also repair goes down. So we start to get that cellular damage. We start to suffer from all these different hallmarks of aging. We start to become less resilient. And this sort of damage that builds up in our cells and our bodies then starts to manifest on the outside as the signs and symptoms that we see as part of the aging process. So there's been a lot of interest from scientists who said, well, if this molecule is really important and its decline causes all these issues, then why don't we just not let it decline? Why don't we keep it topped up as we get older? And if we can keep it high, will it mean that we can keep our energy? Will it mean that we can keep all the repair and resilience that we have when we're young? And I guess the answer to that is that, yes, it's been proven in, hundreds, if not thousands of different studies now that boosting NAD is a very beneficial thing to do in terms of repairing cellular health, which then has its effect of actually helping aging on the outside and our general health as well.
Is there a good way of measuring our biological age, but also our baseline NAD levels before
So
supplements?
first of all, NAD is definitely something you can measure in a laboratory. So we've run several clinical studies, where we literally have participants and take their blood and, their NAD is measured. But it's not something that is available for general lab work and also for general, consumer to order as a kit online and do their own tests. And this is because NAD is very unstable, which means that if you take a blood sample in a practice or at home, the time it takes to then get the sample to the lab, the NAD will completely degrade. And unfortunately, nobody has yet found a way to stabilize it to mean that it can actually survive the transit time. So unless you literally have a lab, on the doorstep and you can take it there straight away, that's not a practical way to do it. Unfortunately, it would be great if we could measure it easily. But there's a lot of companies popping up that do say, do a finger prick blood test at home and post it off and we'll tell you your NAD levels. Unfortunately, they really are not reputable and don't have any data to show stability. So I would definitely avoid those. So the kind of surrogate biomarker is biological age. And this is something that is way more stable. It's something that you can measure, in a practice. You can measure it at home. It's literally like a little finger prick blood test. You have a blood spot card that goes in the post, and you are receiving a biological age back from that. The way it works is it actually measures. I mean, there's several different types of biological age tests, but generally what they measure is changes in patterns of things in our body. So a really common one is an epigenetic age test. And what this does is it looks at patterns of genes that are switched on and off in your cells. Because generally somebody that is younger will have a certain pattern of genes switched on. That's like a youthful pattern of genes. And as they get older, this gradually changes more towards a older pattern of genes. So you can literally take a blood sample, look at the person's cells and look at which genes are switched on. And that gives a very good indication of where they are on that age scale. Another similar one is a glycan age test, which is looking at glycans, which are little sugar molecules attached to our immune cells. And again, very similar. If I took a sample from my daughter, she would have a very youthful pattern of these glycan sugars. If I took it from me, it would be older, hopefully not too much older. But if I took it from my parents, it would look very different again, a very different pattern. So that is kind of the best way to kind of measure NAD and the effect of NAD, but without actually measuring NAD itself.
Thank you. Are there any companies that you trust and you'd be happy to share with us? I'm happy to later on get those from you and put them in the description notes, because there's so much out there, and I often find that it's very confusing to know which one to choose and which one to trust when it comes to testing our gut microbiome, when it comes to testing our skin microbiome, and now biological aging and other factors. So we'd love your recommendations with regards to that.
Yeah, I agree. It can be a bit of a minefield because as things like these things are new science, but as things become more popular, you start to see lots of companies popping up that are claiming all sorts, but actually have very little science behind them. So in terms of a company that has good scientific credibility, the one I recommend for a biological age test is a company called GlycanAge. Again, just because they are scientists before a consumer product company, very similar to myself. So they are very passionate about having good science. They have a very strong scientific team, lots of research, lots of clinical studies and papers to back it up. So that would certainly be the one that I would recommend.
Thank you. And a lot of clinics and well-being centers are now offering NAD IV drips. So I see there are three different choices for people right now. So supplements, you buy the tablets you take at home. You do at-home NAD injections, and there is IV drips that you go to a well-being center or a clinic and you get an IV drip. What are your thoughts on that, please?
So the reason that these IV drips and injections came about is because when people were first trying to boost NAD, when we realized it was a good thing to do, people thought, well, we'll just put pure NAD and we'll put it in a capsule and we'll swallow it and then that'll go into our cells and, boost it. But unfortunately, it was realized very quickly that this is not a good option because NAD is very unstable. So it can't get through the gut. So this is where the IVs and the injections came about. Generally, if something isn't stable, then you probably need to do an IV drip or you need to inject it to bypass the gut. So a lot of these types of therapies became popular. But then as we learn more about NAD, we actually realize that because it's a large molecule, it's very difficult for it to actually get into the cells. So yes, an IV or an injection will get it kind of halfway there. It gets it into the body, it gets it into the blood. NAD itself doesn't actually do anything in the blood. It actually needs to be inside of the cells because this is where all of the repair pathways are that it powers. This is where the energy production power plants, our mitochondria, are. None of this exists in our blood. So having NAD in the blood is pretty pointless. And because it's a large molecule, it means it can't just freely diffuse into our cells. Cells don't let things pass in very easily. And if it's a big molecule, it usually needs like a special channel. And it was very quickly realized that most of our cells do not have this channel. So the NAD goes into the blood and it's stuck there. And this is why when people do the injections or the IVs, they'll often say, I felt awful when I did it. I felt really sick and nauseous and tight chest and heart palpitations, because your body is like, wow, why have I got all this NAD in my blood? It should not be there. It has to kickstart metabolism. It has to start trying to break it down. So that kind of like meant that, these IVs and the injections unfortunately aren't doing exactly what we'd hoped they would do. So then this is where the next sort of generation of supplements came, where it was like, okay, if the big NAD molecule doesn't work, can we give the body a smaller molecule? Can we give the body the raw material that it needs to actually make NAD? So what many people don't realize is that NAD, we don't get it from our diet. All of our NAD is actually made and recycled in our cells. So the idea behind these supplements are precursors where they are small enough to go into the cell, and then the cells, take this raw material, these precursors, and then turn them into the big NAD molecule inside the cell. So again, as with any science, it's constantly changing. We thought at the time this was the best thing to do. But now what we know is actually the reason NAD is declining in the first place is actually because the pathway or the enzyme in our cell that literally takes the raw material and turns it into NAD, that is the thing that goes wrong with age. So if you take a precursor supplement, you are literally like piling all this raw material into the cell that doesn't have the ability to turn it into anything. So it just builds up and then causes other problems. So the latest science shows if you really want to boost NAD, you actually just need to fix this issue in the cell. And that's what we've really specialized in, trying to develop something that will actually fix the root cause of this NAD decline.
So how do your products work?
So very, very differently to everything else. Everything else is just the raw material. NMN, NR, those are the common supplements, NAD supplements that you'll come across. They are literally the raw material. And I always get people to think about the cell as an NAD producing factory. And if you went to this NAD producing factory and you were like, okay, why has my NAD production gone down? And you went in and you saw it was because the machines were broken, the pipes were leaking, there was no staff. You would literally, there is no way you would just say, well, let's ignore all this problem and let's just order some more raw material and hope that it gets more NAD out the end. You would say, no, we need to fix the machines. We need to get the leaking pipes mended. We need to get some better staff. And, as an analogy, that is effectively how our product works. It has some of the raw material in, but it also has many other different ingredients that are designed to fix all of these issues that we now know go wrong in our cells to cause NAD decline.
That's quite interesting. Nichola, are there any contradictions? Can we overdo this?
So NAD itself, like quite often people say, well, can I boost it too much? But actually it's very, very difficult, even with the best supplementation, to get it to the levels that we had when we were young. So we're born with incredibly high NAD, but it halves every 20 years. So even by age 20, we've lost half the NAD we had when we were born. By age 40, that's halved again. 60, that's halved and halved again. So it declines really exponentially. And, boosting it is not a harmful thing to do, because NAD is something that is naturally very high in our bodies. We're used to having high NAD, but it declines with age. And we know its decline is associated with all the sort of negative benefits on cellular health.
Interesting. So if there are patients who are on different medications, supplementing their life and diet with NAD, with scientifically backed NAD supplements like yours, there are no contradictions.
So not that we know of. Obviously, we can't. We always say anybody who has specific medical conditions or is on like a big cocktail of different drugs. We always say double check, because we can't test a supplement in combination with every combination of medication that someone's on. But we've been on the market for 5 years now, and we obviously record all adverse events or anything like that, and we haven't had anything come up so far that has been an issue. And we have a lot of customers who are older and who are taking all of the sort of common things that older people end up having to take as they get older and acquire multiple age related diseases, and we don't seem to have any impact there.
Fantastic. So if somebody doesn't want to be on NAD long term and they have an operation coming up, a big life event coming up, aesthetic procedures, anything like that, how long before and after the procedure or the event should they take this to help optimize their cellular health?
So let's say, as an example, like an aesthetic procedure or something like that, we would say definitely a month at least beforehand. The reason we say a month is our clinical trial. So we did a full double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical study on the product. We know that after 28 days, we see a significant increase in NAD, and we also see a significant increase in the levels of that key enzyme that naturally makes your NAD. We see a reduction in inflammation. We saw a reversal of biological age, reversal of glycation. All of these things happen within 28 days. So we know you want to be looking at least 28 days to pretty much prime the cells. We know from another study that we've done that was 3 months, we actually start to see benefits on the outside. So we actually looked at levels of redness and rosacea. And we saw benefits after 3 months. So, for somebody who doesn't want to take this continuously, although we would suggest that, keeping your NAD up is like your foundational thing that you really should do, continuously. But if the patient doesn't want to do that, definitely between 1 month and 3 months, ideally 1 month on the lead up, 2 months after, or in between procedures, is ideal.
Thank you. It's not always practical for everybody to take supplements. I forget my supplements here and there. Cost
Mhm.
is an issue for many. So, what
Mhm.
can people do naturally to help enhance their NAD production?
In terms of NAD, we know that there are a couple of things that we can do in our lifestyles that actually increase NAD naturally. And these all revolve around putting our bodies under a little bit of energy stress.
Mm,
So the top two things are firstly, fasting. And secondly, some high intensity exercise. And the way that these two things work is that they literally cause an energy deficiency in the cell. So if we're not eating, if we are exercising, our cells are like, oh, we're not getting enough energy, or we're using way more energy than we have available. So what the cell does is it almost sets off like a little energy alarm bell, and it says, uh-oh, don't have enough energy coming in. So we need to turn up our own energy production, and we also need to turn up our own repair, so that if this energy stress causes any damage, we're equipped to deal with it. And the way it does this is by literally switching back on that enzyme in our cell that makes our own NAD, and we start to see NAD levels go up. So this is a natural way of increasing NAD. Again, that's been proven in clinical trials. So, using that alone or using that in conjunction with supplements is certainly a really good way to actually boost NAD levels in the body.
thank you very much. So, there are different kinds of fasting. There's intermittent fasting, dry fasting. What kind of fasting was studied, please?
So in these, so there's two. There's caloric restriction, which is where you're going for extended periods on very low calories. That is probably the best version, but that is definitely not anything that anyone really wants to do. It's not practical at all. So what seems to be beneficial is intermittent fasting, and actually this is pretty easy to incorporate into your life. It can be as simple as having your evening meal earlier and having your breakfast later. And There's a lot of argument over exactly how long you need to get the benefits, but the sort of general consensus right now is that for post-menopausal women, it's a shorter period. You're looking more between 12 and 14 hours of fasting. So again, that could be like having your last food at 8 p.m. and then having your first meal of the day after 10. It's not that tricky to do. Perimenopausal, menopausal, postmenopausal women, you're looking at a bit longer, more the 14 to 16 hours. And for men, you're definitely looking at longer, more like the 16-hour window. So yeah, that's a sort of general consensus on how long it should be.
Thank you. Any studies for pregnancy and breastfeeding and NAD supplements?
So we don't recommend taking during pregnancy and breastfeeding simply because it's something that hasn't been tested in this group of women. You know, many supplements will say that not because you think there's any harm, but because you just don't. It hasn't been tested. However, we know in studies that are not with our product, in studies that are simply boosting NAD, you know, some of these studies not in humans yet, but in animals, in mice, we see a huge benefit in terms of NAD and female fertility. We know that NAD restoration has been shown to improve the egg quality in Asian females, and also has been shown to restore ovarian function, and also reduce inflammation in the ovaries and premature ovarian aging. So there's definitely some really exciting research and some exciting links there. So yeah.
That's quite interesting. And how long were they taking the supplements for before they saw such improvements?
In those ones, I'm not sure. I think those ones were the mouse studies, so I'm not entirely sure with that. But we again, something that we haven't tested in any trials, and I always like to back up anything I say with data. But you know, aside from that, we do have a lot of customer anecdotal feedback, and we know that we do have multiple women who have, you know, been on fertility journeys with things like IVF and have definitely noticed an improvement in egg quality, egg collection, after using the product.
Thank you very much. Nicola, what's your protocol for staying beautiful and young? What do you do yourself? Question I ask everybody on the podcast.
So for me, it goes really back to lifestyle. You just can't outrun a bad lifestyle, and unfortunately, again, I think this is a real mindset shift of a lot of people. People think there's a magic pill, or there's a one thing that you should do, or there's this one collagen, or there's one, you know, there's going to be this one magic thing, and it's really not. So everything that I do really is focused on how to help my body to look after itself. So basically, our bodies are amazing at repairing, at, you know, keeping us in good health. Only need to look at a child, and they don't need any collagen supplements. They don't need any aesthetic procedures. Like, their body does it all. And the interesting thing is that it's all still within our bodies. So things that you can do just to switch it back on. So a lot of these things that actually create a little bit of stress are actually good for us. So this is a concept called hormesis. This is why the exercise helps. This is why the fasting helps. You'll probably have saw people doing things like sauna, cold shower, temperature therapies. Again, it's we live very comfortable lives where we're eating all the time, we're in temperature controlled environments, we're not exercising, we're sitting. Our bodies weren't designed for that. So all of these amazing repair pathways that are already within us, like, are just not getting switched on. So a lot of the things that people should be focusing on, and is, effectively what I do, is how do you really switch those processes back on in your body and let your body repair itself from the inside out.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So before we wrap up, can you please share any practical tips for our listeners who want to take proactive steps towards their healthy aging? And
Yeah.
I kind of know what you're going to say.
Well, I obviously completely biased, but NAD is obviously a foundational thing. I'm obsessed with it for a reason, because I've seen the data and I know the benefits it can have in the body. If you can impact your cells, you can impact everything on the outside. So really making sure you're on top of your NAD levels is really important. So many people take all sorts of different supplements very blindly without really knowing whether they're deficient, whether they really need them. The one thing we know is that pretty much everyone becomes deficient in NAD as they get older. So it's kind of it's a good investment if you're going to invest in one thing. But having said that, do not be buying supplements if you are eating a beige diet, smoking 20 cigarettes a day, and not sleeping. Those things have to be really fixed first. So looking at lifestyle, diet is a huge one. Simple things like incorporating lots of different variety in terms of fruits and vegetables and plant materials into your diet can have such a profound impact. We know that, I always say it's food is nature's medicine cabinet. Again, from a background in drug development, I've saw so many active molecules that come out of our foods that work just as well as drugs. So do not underestimate the power of what you are putting in your body through your diet and the effect that has on it as well.
Thank you. Has there been any studies with regards to the NAD levels for vegans, vegetarians, and carnivore diet, or we don't know?
Don't know. Not that I know, no.
And are your products vegan and vegetarian friendly?
Yes, they are. Yeah. Vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. It was
You're very welcome.
It was a very excellent podcast together. Thank you. I think there's a lot more we can talk about, but this is a very good introductory video and podcast. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to speaking with you soon again.
You're very welcome. That was great to chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you.